coming to today's inaugural colloquium lecture for the spring 2012 semester. We have a series of 7 talks this semester. All will be in this room at 3 p.m. on Fridays. If you check our website, you can get the information on the different topics. The next one will be February 3rd on the Arab Spring, particularly looking at Syria, and we go through until the end of April. One other announcement for this semester is our film series that begins February 1st, the first Wednesday of the month, February, March, April, and May. And this semester's film series theme is music and pop culture. We have a very good selection of films for you this semester. So today we have, seem to have misplaced the intro I wrote. Anyway, today we have a guest, international photographer Robert Leutheuser, who will be talking to us about Kurdish culture, in particular looking at this culture through proverbs. Robert has been a photographer for more than 45 years, and particularly in the last decade or so, focusing solely on photography in the Middle East, and with an interest in Kurdish culture in Syria, Iraq, Turkey, and in the Caucasus. He just went to Azerbaijan in the fall, where he met with Kurdish community there. He's been in Georgia and Armenia as well. Presented in Germany in November. Frequently presents throughout the U.S. and Europe. His photography on proverbs. If you go to his website, beyondbordersphotography.com, fascinating photo galleries of Yazidi Kurds, which we saw last night, a collection of Kurdish women, and also Kurdish proverbs. And he spent years doing field work, photographing the Kurds in the region, and he's putting together a book now, looking at these proverbs. How can you explain a culture through their sayings and some of their words of wisdom? I won't go into much more detail because I want to give him as much time as possible. So please join me in welcoming Robert Leutheuser.
Thank you, and to those who I saw yesterday, it's a pleasure to see you again. And I failed to compliment the Center for Middle Eastern Studies for their reception and photographic show yesterday. It was superb. Well done to the center and Kirsten for what you did. It was spectacular. I have been toting a list of proverbs around in my pockets for almost 10 years, collecting as I go along of Kurdish proverbs and keeping my eyes open for photographic opportunities. It has been a wonderful experience and has helped me gain more insights into the culture, which I do know, and I get to know from the ground level up quite well. Today, as Christian says, in this lecture I will use selected Kurdish proverbs. I've got several hundred of them, but these are which I collected to tell a story in their entirety, each coupled with a photograph. And this will help us explore the Kurdish culture as I've discovered the culture through my years of travel. I will include stories or little snippets behind the photographs as appropriate, but likely we'll let those go by and we can go back and revisit them in the question and answer that will follow. I'm going to try mightily to do this in a half an hour. Christian explained I have been traveling throughout Kurdistan in the last decade plus. The most frequently visited and where I have the most intimate experience is in southeastern Turkey and northern Iraq and Kurdistan. This is because of access and because of affection and because this is where numerically most of the Kurds are found. Although I have been to Iran several occasions in the Caucasus and Syria. Question I want to answer quickly is why am I interested in the Kurds? Where did this come from? I am a biologist, and I retired from a full career as a biologist in Western water management. I retired happily and in good health 10 years ago, 11 years now. And in 1997, I traveled to Turkey for the first time and got as far east as Şanlıurfa, Omar's home. And this was in the last years of the Kurdish separatist wars, so travel was less friendly, a little more risky, and I was less experienced. However, I had an experience there for several days. It's a large Kurdish community, and I was smitten. 4 years later, in 2001, I was able to go back for an extended tour, and this is 2 years after the ceasefire, so it became a more welcoming environment. And I was taken by the landscape and the people, both which I characterize as unadorned. I like to think that the Kurds chose me, not that I chose the Kurds. And I go back year after year and build on inquiries. I will go somewhere, I'll learn something, I'll come back and I'll read, and a question will come up. And if I have the opportunity, if I can make the arrangements, I will return to a region to answer that question. For example, Armenia. I asked myself the question in between travels, how did the Kurds and the Armenians occupy the same real estate for hundreds of years, a millennium plus, and not have major conflict? So I went to Armenia to try to understand the Armenians a little more, and so it goes. It feeds on itself. It's a self-feeding loop. And it did occur to me recently that I have witnessed, as a visitor, as a guest, the Kurdish peoples, some of the cultures, for the first decade of the 21st century. And in the entirety, all of a sudden my experiences build to where I start to have a perspective, and comes the responsibility and the pleasure of sharing insights with other people. I'm going to go so quickly through just a geographical and historical orientation for those of you. We got a new setup here, excuse me. For those of you who participated yesterday, this is going to be a lot quicker. The red trapezoid, and that's generous, polygon, is what is commonly called Kurdistan. Kurdistan as a region, these are not political boundaries. That's important to understand. Look and you do understand the location, where it is on a continental perspective. Again, just a broad orientation. The Kurdish peoples, 30 to 35 million. Numbers are imprecise, and you will have a wide range of estimates that you will read. Over half, or about half, are in Turkey. Iraq has 20%, Iran 10%, and this is all contiguous, Syria about 5%. There is a significant population, an expatriate population in Europe, and to a lesser extent here in the States. The Kurds are not Arabs, they are not Turks, they are not Persians, they are Kurds. It's an ethnic group, the fourth largest in the Middle East. They are universally cited as the largest ethnic group in the world not to have their own country. The Kurdish language is Indo-European, related to Farsi, Persian. Two main language groups, Kurmanji and Sorani, Kurmanji being numerically and geographically the much larger of the groups. A whole lot of dialects because of the topography, over 80 discernible dialects, and there are a couple of offshoots there too, but it is a Indo-European language. Mainly, 85%, again, these are, round big numbers, Sunni Muslim. 85%, call it 15 or something, 10%. Most of the remainder are Shia Muslim. And then that small leftover, you'll have a collection of religions, some particular to the Kurdish peoples, like Yazidism. You have the Ali Haq, you have the Alevi, which is a broader, there are many Turks as well as Kurdish adherents to the Alevis. You have Christians and Jews, but a very small portion. Location, location, location. This is in the red area is Kurdistan. The green area is the Fertile Crescent. The very bright and dominant white lines are the boundaries of the current modern nation states. In everything I say, I'm going to round things off. I don't want anybody to ever mistake precision for accuracy. There's not a lot of precision to be had in this part of the world, regardless of your field of interest or study, and certainly with the Kurdish peoples. The physical environment, and I find this extraordinarily important, the Zagros Mountains into the, yesterday I said Atlas, the Taurus Mountains is hugely important to who the Kurdish peoples are. About 1,000 miles long, stretching latitude is extraordinarily important. We can go anywhere around the world and get a sense for where we are. Down around here, Phoenix. Up around here, Salt Lake City. The mountains they're big mountains up to 14,000 feet. Fertile Crescent is well earned its name. We're not going to go into it. A lot went on here very early in civilizations. Domestication of grains, of animals, animal husbandry. You have Mesopotamia in the 3rd millennium BC. A lot is this heart. As things are being discovered in Turkey, we were finding even prior to some early archaeological evidence of cities, well before when they anticipated like 10 years ago. And what you have in this baseline is this incredible movement of empires and peoples and ideas. The Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great, Alexander the Great comes whipping back, the Roman Empire comes up into here. You have the Asian population, including the Turks, the Seljuks coming down, sweeping through the area with Genghis Khan, with Tamerlane. You have the religions, Zoroastrianism sweeps across, or sweep in, maybe makes it sound like it's going quicker than it is, but you have a migration of religions. You have the Abrahamic religions coming up here, Judaism, you have Christianity, and of course what is largely defines the area right now is in the 7th century, the spread of Islam, which was explosive, and there we can use the word swept. It happened quickly and completely. A lot going on. When all of this went on, the mountains are still here, and the Kurds are still here. So they're in the middle of the action. There's no question about it, and have been for a very long time. Modern history, World War I, the decline of the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century, the sick man of Europe. Finally, World War I did them in. And to the victors go the spoil, and following the defeat of the Axis, then the modern nation state boundaries were established, and which put the Kurdish population, the indigenous population, in 4 countries to live for the past roughly century, 90 years. I told you around the last century. To deal with a modern political reality. How long have the Kurds been Kurds? What makes, it's a rhetorical question. What makes an ethnic group an ethnic group? Shared language, shared cultural traits, such as dress, lifestyle values. I don't know, and if anybody says that they do know, I would be suspicious. The Kurds have been here for a long time, a couple thousand years, 3,000 years, I don't know, but a very long time, through these events, these global events, if you will. So what we have is an indigenous population rooted in rugged mountains, surrounded by and often consumed by the most profound sweeps of history, beginning with the dawn of agriculture and through the city-states, kingdoms, empires, and nation-states. These mountains, I'll stress, these are the Zagros. This is in northern Iraq. You have to understand their topography. This is their home. This is where they could retreat to. This is where they develop their social structures. This is who the Kurds are. The winters, although this is actually a quite welcoming photograph, but winter in the mountains, regardless where you are at these latitudes, the higher up you go, the more rigorous it becomes, and this is the homeland. This is where the Kurds are from. And these winters are real. I had read about them so much, and I had traveled in 2006. I said, okay, I got to go there. And so I did, and I wasn't disappointed at all, although I was really cold. These are Kurdish men in western Iran, in the town of Uramana, and they actually speak, I think it's Gurdame, a quite distinct subdialect. I did really good on whipping through those. Okay, Proverbs, here we go. Proverbs are what? They're short metaphorical sayings that teach cultural and moral values in simple language. This is one of my proverbs. When you've got a whole pocket full of proverbs in your pocket, you start thinking this way. But this is a quick one. You can burn a book, but not a proverb. Proverbs endure. They're an oral way of passing on the wisdoms of life. Metaphorical, it depends. The metaphor is not only the content of the wisdom, if you will, it's how it's expressed. We can say the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, or it can be said a neighbor's hen looks as big as a goose and his wife as young as a girl. It's the same wisdom, and many of the wisdoms are universal. I want to say that I am presenting this from the larger Kurdish family perspective. Some of my images are from the Yazidi community. There's a whole conversation about the ethnic relationship between Yazidis and Kurds. I have no problem including them in the larger Kurdish family. I should sweep that off. That's supposed to disappear. There we go. One crowded hour of glorious life is worth an age without a name. This is so fundamental to the Kurdish people, to their history. This is in northern Syria. The Kurds have routinely been denied the right of being Kurdish. They have been denied in Turkey under Ataturk until recently, until the 1990s, of speaking Kurdish. The names of villages were changed from Kurdish to Turkish. In Syria, in the mid-60s, the identity papers of a whole class, 120,000 Syrians or of Kurds, were taken away. Their identity has been, throughout history at different junctures, has been taken away. In northern Iraq, in Saddam's time with the Yazidi Kurds, Saddam just simply declared Yazidis to be Arabs for political purposes. Self-identity is huge. And this proverb, I believe, speaks to it quite well. This is the most iconic of all Kurdish proverbs, and I thought, Amy, that this would be the one that you quoted. The Kurds have no friends but the mountains. It speaks to the reality. It's not merely metaphorical. The metaphor is huge. It's right there. But it's also actual throughout their history. And it remains, it continues to be a place of physical refuge without judging the political agenda. But the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, who is involved in the separatist guerrilla war in Turkey, they take refuge within northern Iraq for, let's just speak of which we know of, in the last 80 years, rebellions and wars, not only with other powers, but among themselves. I mean, these mountains are real. They're very real, and they're extraordinarily important. It's interesting, though, and in preparation for today was actually looking at different information. Something very important happened in the 1920s and 1930s is this impenetrable fortress. Technology caught up with them. It was the drones of the 1920s where the British used airplanes and bombings for the first time against civilian populations. They didn't target the civilians, but the civilians were victims. All of a sudden, the mountains were accessible. And then between 28 and 1932, the Hamilton Road, a road that military armament could drive on through a really rugged area of the Zagros Mountains. So the mountains have lost some of the protection that they once afforded. When a cat wants to eat her kittens, she says they look like mice. That's pretty harsh. But it's extraordinarily true within the large Kurdish family, if you will. Kurds within the Kurdish family can take a look at another Kurd and say they look like mice. And in history, the Kurds do take up arms and are quite passionate in fighting other Kurds, whether it is in a secular sense against the agas and the landowners and the barons, or a religious sense, as the Kurds will fight, Muslim Kurds will persecute non-Muslim Kurds. It's very real. It still occurs. It occurred last month in the northern city of Zakho on the Turkish border, where Muslim Kurds went on a rampage of burning and looting Christian and Yazidi Kurd businesses. It's very real. During the separatist war, 1984 to 1999 in Turkey, Kurds were also village guards who worked in tandem in total they were hired by the government. They worked with the Turkish army to fight against the other Kurds who were part of the PKK, the guerrillas. Women in society, conflicting attitudes and values can and do exist, and they're really apparent during this period of accelerated movement from rural to urban environments. And the social structure of the families are being stressed, they are being damaged, if not obliterated. But let's start with the nice stuff. Kurds, in the Kurdish culture, they are lovers of beauty, as they should be. There are a lot of beautiful women and extraordinarily handsome men to appreciate. Universal, they just put it nicely into their proverbs. If God didn't like beautiful women, he would not have made them. And beauty passes, but wisdom remains. Still just an acknowledgement. I think these are universal truths. And I've been really fortunate in my travels to be welcomed by the Kurdish peoples and to be allowed this kind of access to the women, which sometimes is difficult to get. But moving on to the more pertinent for transitions and changes, a lion is a lion, whether a male or a female. The Kurdish culture does respect its women. It's different. It is different than I've seen in other cultures. All cultures of the region, all cultures are evolving. They're evolving quickly. It is still a male-dominated culture. However, there is this greater level of respect. This change of urbanization from a village setting is pretty stark to where this is a statement of equality. Nothing more, nothing less. That's total equality. The history certainly supports it. They have gone through, the Kurdish people have gone through many periods and almost a continual period of hardships where they'll go back to the mountains and the women are right there, bearing their portion of the burdens, if not carrying the families. In the PKK, the guerrilla warfare, the guerrilla group, to the Kurdish rights group, the role of women is extraordinary. By definition, they say that at least, I think there's a quota system. 1/3 of the PKK guerrillas need to be women. A lot of the women who go there are coming from a village setting where they had less rights and they want to go into this. This is a Marxist. It began as a Marxist organization. There is this movement and a push by some of the elements to go into an absolute equal environment. A woman is a fortress, a man her prisoner, acknowledgement of the reality of a family regardless of the external roles that we may see on the streets, that behind closed doors, those women wield power. I have seen it indirectly. I've not been behind closed doors. I've had young Kurdish men who have gotten married talk about exactly how true this is in their trepidation of getting married because they know they will be a prisoner. I'm at 3:30 already. God created women, and women created the hearth. Self-explanatory. This is the traditional role of the women in a village setting. I did spend a good amount of my time in the first years of travel seeking out the more traditional settings. Now I find myself more in the urban settings. And women's are the anchors of the families, and the families are the basic unit of traditional Kurdish society. Allegiance is diluted through the progression from the family to the clan to the tribe, and now there's this ongoing sense of nationhood. But the family is the unit, it remains the unit, although being traveled. This is 3 generations, aren't they lovely, of the Gahardi women in the village of Berhwan in western Iran. One can never repay one's debt to one's mother. Within the family, and this is expressing, I think, a less widely accepted truth is your son can be a prince, but your daughter will be a mother. And the more traditional rule you go, the more you're going to see the more traditional values, which this does reflect. One beats one's breast who does not beat a child. Well, that's pretty tough, but we've got our own. Spare the rod, spoil the child. The Kurdish families I've had the privilege of being with in a family setting, the children are adored, absolutely adored. And they are coddled and everything, but the children grow up quickly. When they're starting to walk, they're starting to do chores. By the time, and I make up a number, they're 4 or 5 years old, you know, that whole thing of being adored and coddled is over. They're part of the family in a traditional sense, and they've got work to do. And I've also seen discipline, which was uncomfortable, but if we think back to the traditional roots, it shouldn't be a secret. It shouldn't be anything to be ashamed of. Within the family, the enemy of a father will not be the friend of the son. Grudges stick around, and they stick around for a long time. We just had a conversation about within a family locally where this wisdom seems to transcend cultures. The bond of brothers can only be severed by death. These are the Omeriko brothers in Germany from their Syrian Kurds, delightful men. But there's that sense of loyalty, of bondage. This whole thing of the family is so important. The idea of friendships and visitors, this is Kurdish, but it's also regional. I think all of us, any of us who are familiar with the area, it doesn't matter whether it's in an Arab culture, whether it's in a Turkish culture, a Kurdish culture, Persian culture, the hospitality is incredible and is born of, again, the region. You never know when you're going to be a visitor. You've got, and you will welcome a visitor within the Arab culture. Maybe, Kristen, you can correct me, but the basic rule is, you know, I'm going to welcome you. You are my guest. You are safe under my protection for 3 days. After 3 days, or whatever that number of days is, you walk out the door, all bets are off. You're not my guest anymore. So I'm going to offer you refuge. But if you walked in as my enemy, you're my guest for 3 days, you're going to walk out the door, you're still my enemy. So you better watch your back. Eat and drink with your friends, but do not trade with them. I think this is pretty universal. We talk about, I don't know what the equivalent is within Western proverbs, but we have something thereabouts. A good companion shortens the longest road. This is taken some number of years ago, the Turkish village of Eil, one of the villages, or small town actually, that was the victim of the separatist war, where they were caught between the hammer and the anvil. Persecuted or attacked by both the army and the Kurdish guerrillas. It's guerrilla warfare. Of everything else, the newest, of friends, the oldest. This is an incredible town in the Dersim region. There are centenarians up there all over the place. These dudes are running around, a bunch of 100-year-olds, and this is up high in the mountains. Just an incredible and very welcoming. These are largely Alevis, and they speak the Zaza dialect, which is quite different than the other dialects. The whole thing of independence, self-reliance, hard work, and honor goes through the culture. Again, think back to where they're coming from. Whoever is fond of cream should take the cow around with him. This poor guy, I had been looking for this photograph for literally, I can say years, 2, 3, 4 years. Driving down, going down to some small town in southern Turkey looking for blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, I see this guy in the field, and I'm with a Kurdish driver, a taxi cab. I said, stop. I go running across the field, and this poor guy is just out there walking his damn cow. And here comes this, here I come with cameras dangling. He was gracious, they always are. This may, because of the story behind it, may rank as my most favorite. Work as if you were to live forever, live as if you would die tomorrow. This goes back to the glorious life. A tribulation is better than 100 warnings. This is in northern Iraq with an Yazidi Kurd walking from the grave of somebody he had buried 4 months ago who was the victim of a terrorist attack. The relationship with God, with the Kurdish people. Somebody wrote that Kurds are known to wear their religion lightly. I think it's a wonderful phrase. There are very religious Kurds and there are unreligious Kurds, as we are with our religions. I find this telling. One is equally indebted to God and to one's teacher and to God. There is a bringing in of the human element. Both the hunter and the hunted rely on God. God is, there's a full recognition within the culture of God, monotheistic God. There's also a compassionate God. God finds a low branch for the bird that cannot fly, and I really like that one. With fortune on your side, you can sow salt and harvest grass. As in our language, that could be with God on your side, but the word of this is fortune. And fortune is secular. No matter where you go, your destiny follows you. This is on Mount Ararat during the summer pasturage. The relationship with wealth and the haves and have-not. The Kurdish history it's a feudal society. There are periods where it's feudal. It's what feudalism is. You've got a landlord and people who are more or less effectively owned by the landlord, the agas, the feudal lords. The rich man's wealth tires a poor man's jaw. This is kind of like the Kurdish Occupy Wall Street stuff. When Madame drops her cup of tea, it makes no sound, which is delightful. Even the highest tree has an axe waiting at its foot. And empty words will not fill an empty stomach. There is a full respect, as most cultures have, of the elders and of wisdom. For every wise man, there is one still wiser. And fear an ignorant man more than a lion. It's surprising within the Proverbs, there are quite a few that do talk about reflection, personal reflection, and one wouldn't think of people who have a very active and a very turbulent and maybe a ferocious life to acknowledge this idea of reflection. Loneliness is a nest for the thoughts. It is more difficult to contend with oneself than with the world. And I'm going to shoot through these without the backstories. Patience is bitter, but it bears sweet fruit. Again, one normally thinks of the Kurdish people as being more reactionary, less contemplative, less patient, but they acknowledge the importance of. And this, going back to the opening slide, this is the conclusion. It is tempting to simplify the Kurdish culture as if it was monolithic. It is not. It is deeply varied on all levels. However, as a people, the Kurds do share traits, and that's where one naturally starts in trying to understand others. Although as a rule I would characterize the Kurds as unadorned, and I have a lot of other adjectives, but I like unadorned. They have fewer layers masking behaviors and norms. They should never ever be considered simple. They are infinitely complex. But I have chosen 3 characteristics as an umbrella. First is honor. Death on your feet is better than life on your knees. And I do have 2 images here. Excuse me. This is Mustafa Barzani, extraordinarily important in the modern history of the Kurds and their quest for independence. But also, it's the beginning of mythologies that we all create as cultures. It ignores many, many weaknesses that Barzani had, but he is revered and shall increasingly be revered as one of the fathers of an independent Turkey. The next characteristic, and I think is hugely important, is regardless of their separation from their roots, Kurds always seem to self-identify as Kurds. I'm a Kurd. And maybe they're 2 generations away from it. Maybe they don't speak Kurmanji, but there's this strong self-identification, and of course for the future of a people that's extraordinarily important. Do not forget the spring you drank from. And the last characteristic, which will be the title of my book on Proverbs, is the perseverance. The snow melts, but the mountain remains. And this is, if I chose one proverb to talk about the Kurds, this would be it. The Kurds are still here after so many thousands of years. They're not a people. There's a theme. I've got a list of books of the Kurds being victimized, of people to feel sorry for. They've been put upon. And that's true. There are those elements, but there's so much more. And the Kurds deserve more than to be pegged and to be felt sorry for. The Kurds should not be patronized, lionized, nor pitied. The Kurds should be honored simply for being Kurds. And I'm looking for it here. Oh, we got one more here. This one more, but thank you for that. This is my own proverb. Do not let a foreigner tell you the words of your father. So, Kurds shouldn't be, I'm the foreigner. Don't listen to me. Thank you very much.